Hi, I'm Mike McLean. Welcome to the Short Circuit podcast brought to you by Swift Aircraft. In this series, we'll be chatting with a variety of people from all walks of life, but who all have one thing in common: aviation. We'll discuss how and why they got into aviation, what or who inspired them, and what they would say to encourage young people to get involved. Flight fascinates many of us, and our guests will explain why they are compelled to look to the sky. Today's chat is with Ben Jarvis. Ben is an entrepreneurial rocketeer, which is a bit of a mouthful and an unusual career description. When I first met Ben, it was in a small office with a bunch of what looked like cheap pretend toy rockets leaning against the wall in the corner. After 30 seconds of chat, I knew that this was an interesting guy and that I should stay in touch with him. So, 8 years later, I finally get the chance to have a relaxed chat and for me to learn some stuff, much of which I had no idea about. I think you'll find a few surprises as well. But before we kick off, I have a request. Please remember to click the like button, share with friends and colleagues, and subscribe. This really does help us get the word out. So, with that in mind, here goes. So, good afternoon, Mr. Ben Jarvis, and welcome to the Short Circuit podcast. And we're going to start off with question one, and very logically, of course. And question one is, who are you and what is your current role in aviation? And in your case, I'll say, what is your current role in aerospace?
Right. Okay, so my name's Ben Jarvis. I'm currently director of two companies, both of which work in the space sector, but in different areas. Probably the most important of those, certainly for this interview, is Launch Access Limited, which is a company that basically provides hands-on activities, competitions, and opportunities for students and young people to get involved in space projects. So I'm always for practical things over purely academic things, as I'm sure will come up multiple times in the next few minutes. But yeah, so that's mainly what we do. Also run another company which is just getting off the ground called Longbow Space Technologies, that develops mechanical systems for the space sector. So things like release mechanisms and things like that for satellites.
Okay. Well, that's very interesting. So we'll come back to the activities, the detailed activities of Launch Access Limited and stuff. But we're going to go on to question two, which is, how did you get started in all this? You're looking beyond the sky. You're looking out and into space. So why? What started you?
What started? All right. Okay. So I'll keep it to a brief story. So my dad used to work in the special effects industry. So all through my childhood, well, what was one of the things he worked in? He was also ran an engineering company. So come from a long line of people who make things with their hands, I guess. Right. Yeah, my childhood was full of things exploding and catching fire and going whoosh and bang, and always had a I guess a slightly overdeveloped interest in fire and smoke. So one of those children that likes to play with matches, and yeah, I guess when I was about sort of 14 years old, I discovered model rockets. Literally went into a local model shop with a friend of mine from school for he was going to spend some birthday money, and was just sort of lazily browsing around the model shop and saw these sort of boxes sitting on a shelf which had pictures of rockets taking off on them, and I was like, "Oh, that's cool." And then I spoke to the guy in the shop, and he said, "Oh yeah, and these are the rocket engines you can buy for them." And when I realised that you could actually sort of build real rockets that actually had, like, fire and smoke coming out the back of them and go and launch them in your local park, that sort of ticked all the boxes for me, because it was A, something creative, B, something involving engineering, and C, something involving setting fire to stuff. So in a creative and positive way. So I was sort of hooked the moment I sort of built and launched my first model rocket. And it sort of all stemmed from there, really. So I actually trained in product design and industrial design, not really in anything sort of traditionally aerospace related. So a lot of my sort of engineering knowledge came from my dad and from literally just doing projects and needing to learn things in order to know how to achieve what I wanted to achieve. So I guess my start in aerospace was from a hobby point of view. So yeah, started off building model rockets and ended up building real rockets. Just because the model rockets just got bigger and bigger and bigger until they didn't count as model rockets anymore.
So I suppose, is there a legislative line where it goes from being a toy to something serious? I mean, is there a
Yeah,
height or
well,
power or?
yeah, it's so internationally, normally model rockets are classed as being below a certain power level, which is normally 160 newton seconds. So for anyone who's sort of played with model rockets, all of the little solid fuel motors you get for them are classed by letters. A motors are the smallest ones, and the ones you can buy in model shops normally go up to D. So the limit for model rockets is G class. Each letter is twice as powerful as the one before, so that's equivalent to 8 D motors, I think. So that's sort of internationally known as the limit of model rocketry. There's then some slightly grayer sort of barriers further up. You can do what's called high power model rocketry, which still uses sort of factory made rocket motors that you buy from a professional factory that makes them for you, and that normally goes up to sort of O class. So that you're talking still very big. You're talking rockets that give like half a ton of thrust, could
Wow.
lift a person. So you're still talking pretty big rockets, but that still counts as sort of under the hobby rocket banner in most places. The normal sort of line where it sort of veers off into amateur or professional rocketry is when you start building your own rocket engines. So for me, that was about 1997. We sort of reached the limit of what we could, the size of rocket motors we could buy off the shelf, and thought we're going to need even bigger ones. So yeah, we couldn't buy them, so we had to make them. So started designing and building our own hybrid rocket engines at that point. So and really in practical terms, once you've reached that point, that the line between that and sort of the being in the space industry is really just the difference between whether you're paying for your rockets or someone else's. So I've now thankfully graduated to the point where someone else is paying for the rockets. Well,
Right.
most of the time anyway.
Okay. Interesting. I mean, I'd never really thought about rocket. I mean, I'm old enough to remember watching the space race back in the 60s and that sort of thing. And then sort of space seemed to sort of fade away. So it seems to be coming back in it. And I think even today there was a landing on the moon, unmanned, of course, but so it seems to be back in the headlines again. And this must be quite an exciting time for you then.
Yeah, it's. I mean, I would say it was, it was all planned, but no, it's really just blind luck that I happen to have sort of got dragged into the space industry just as it was all becoming, in vogue again, and everyone was putting a lot of money into it. But yeah, I suppose the big change in the last sort of 15, 20 years is that space has gone from being something that governments pay for in order to metaphorically and physically get the high ground, to being something that companies pay for. So it's the difference between what they would call old space, which is that sort of government funded moon landings and all of that stuff where NASA, ESA, and all of the big sort of government space agencies are competing with each other to do the next cool scientific thing, and what they call new space, which is all about money. It's all about we've got X hundred communication satellites that we need to get in orbit for the cheapest price. Who's got the cheapest rocket that can launch them for us? So everyone started looking at the bottom line, and it's, I suppose that's sort of driven a lot of innovation, and from my point of view has driven the possibility of people becoming entrepreneurs in the space sector. So there's a lot of new companies have started up in the space sector and are doing really quite well beyond just SpaceX. It's not just Elon Musk. There's
No.
hundreds and hundreds of companies in the US and the UK and all around the world sort of now doing innovative new things with space that they probably wouldn't have had the opportunity or the money to do before, when it was down to, there was only NASA or ESA or whoever sort of handing out these great big contracts.
Right.
So it's a very, very exciting time for the industry.
With that in mind, then, so Launch Access Limited, I'm curious about that, and I'm also curious how that fits into STEM stroke STEAM, or more the other way around. How do young people access something like Launch Access Limited through STEM?
So what we do mainly is deliver competitions and events on behalf of other organizations most of the time. Having said that, we have actually just won some funding to deliver our own events. But essentially what's started happening, as I said, as the space industry sort of gone from being very small and very niche to being, this great big commercial sector. One of the main things that's happened is that everyone's rapidly begun to realize that there aren't enough people with the skills and the interest in these relevant areas to fill all of the jobs that are being created. So lots and lots of big organizations, including, well, in the UK Space Agency, various other bodies have started setting up sort of competitions and events specifically aimed at students of different age groups, to allow them to get involved in practical space projects. And there's a whole load of competitions. So I'll list a few of them. So there's a competition called UK Rock, which I think is aimed at 12 to 14 or 12 to 16 year olds. So sort of younger end of high school age range, which involves your basically you have to create a team within your school who have to design and build a rocket that meets a certain set of criteria. I think normally they have to carry an egg or a number of eggs on board the rocket, and then fly them to a specific altitude, measure that altitude with an onboard altimeter, and then bring them back safely with a parachute without the eggs breaking.
I like that.
So that's one of the competitions. There's the competition that we support called CanSat, which literally involves again that's aimed at 14 to 18 year olds, so slightly older age group, and that involves building basically a miniature satellite in a container the size of a soft drinks can. So exactly, that's hence it being called CanSat, and that's run by STEM Learning UK and an organisation called SRO, which is basically the European Space Agency's educational arm, and that's run every single year. We literally actually just about to do all of the launches for this year, and there's, I think, 150 something teams from all across the UK, and where what they have to basically sign up to be part of the competition as a school or as a school team, build one of these CanSats. They get all of the advice from STEM Learning UK on how to do it, and then in March each year we hold something like 13 or 14 launch days all around the UK, where they can bring their CanSat and actually get it loaded on a real rocket and launched into the sky to see whether or not it works. And the idea is that the CanSats have to do something. They have to perform normally they have to sort of like measure atmospheric pressure, temperature, things like that. The sort of things that you would actually want a satellite to do in flight. And then they have to send that data back to the ground again. But teams get to do all kinds of like even more advanced things. We had a team last year who built a CanSat that took air samples and looked for like microscopic organisms in the air samples and things like that. So it can be really, really advanced. So other teams literally just designed interesting new parachute shapes in order to bring their CanSats back again. So it can be as advanced or as simple as you want it to be. But the main thing is, as I said, it's the kind of competition where you actually have to get a team together and you have a deadline and you actually physically have to build something. So I've always found that it's that sort of hands-on look, I've actually built something and it's actually flown in the sky is much more powerful and much more useful to sort of encourage people to believe that they can be part of the aerospace sector than just sitting them down and letting them watch a video or teaching them something out of a book.
Mhm.
So that's mainly what we do, is we offer opportunities for students to come and actually be involved in a hands-on project where they get to either build and launch a rocket, or build a satellite and actually get it flown on a rocket. Things like that, as I said, give them a reason to believe that space is an area that they can go and work in.
Right. Okay. That sounds fantastic. Yeah, none of this was available when I was a kid, and I would have loved to set fire to things and fire them up into the sky. But yeah. So actually, quick question on that. So the CAMSATs, to what altitude do they get? How, and how long are they up there for?
So for the UK competition, we are kind of limited by the fact that most of the sites we fly from, we don't have a huge amount of room, and we really need to get them back. So they're launched on the rocket, deployed out of the rocket, have to deploy their own little parachute, and then float back to the ground again. They normally, we aim for between about 1,000 feet and 1,500 feet altitude, simply because we've learned from bitter experience that if you go much higher than that, the odds of you seeing them again are relatively small. They tend to drift off over the horizon. So three or 400 meters is the sort of the target altitude for those ones. Having said that, we also are just embarking on another slightly more advanced competition for undergraduate students, where we're going to be helping them actually fly CubeSats, which are bigger, real satellite format. They're sort of 100 millimeter cubes, effectively, that do real things. And the students have been building those for a long time, but short of actually spending many tens of thousands of pounds to get them actually put into space, they've not had an opportunity to flight test them ever before. So one of the things that we're actually able to do now, we've just won some funding to be able to sort of launch somewhere around 20 or 30 of those a year to an altitude of more like 2 or 3 kilometers, which will give you a sort of 5 to 10 minute flight time in the atmosphere. The CANSATs only going sort of 1,000 to 1,500 feet are only up there for a minute and a half, if that. So it's a relatively short flight, but as I said, that's part of the challenge is you have to be able to do something useful in a relatively short space of time. So your mission window is very finite. So it's a challenge, but as I said, it's it's an interesting thing to get people to try and actually practically achieve.
Excellent. I mean, to me, it all sounds very exciting. I mean, this is an area of, I was going to say aviation. That's, in some ways, it is aviation. I mean, people do the distinction between aviation and aerospace, but you're not going to get one without the other, really. So, it's the niche end of the industry, which I think is completely fascinating and always at the cutting edge of that. Something you mentioned, so you're launching from a whole range of sites around the UK, but I think going back to a couple of years ago, or a few years ago, when we had a previous conversation, you were talking about launch sites. I think was it up in Shetland or on the north coast of Scotland or something like that?
Yes. Yeah, so the UK's has now officially got a number of spaceports, which ultimately, hopefully, will have orbital flights actually going into space from them, or in some cases suborbital flights going into space. One of the ones which I've worked with in the past is in the Shetland Islands. There's another one on the sort of very far north coast of mainland Scotland. There's another one in the Outer Hebrides, and all of these sites are chosen because they're very remote. Obviously, if you're launching stuff into space, you're going to end up going a very long way down range before you reach space, and people for some reason seem to get upset if you fly rockets over the top of cities or other people's countries or islands or things like that. So what you really want is a site on the coast with lots and lots of sea that you can fly over in order to reach space without overflying anything that you don't want to drop a rocket on by accident. So all of the sort of orbital spaceports tend to be on the north coast. firing sort of northwards, so that the next thing you reach is the Arctic Circle, really. So yeah, so that's they're great for real space launches, not so good for the kind of sort of student launches that we do, simply because fishing CanSats out of the sea is very time consuming and very expensive, and they tend to break when you drop them in the sea. So so we tend to do everything that we do from land ranges. So we use a lot of sort of disused airfields, military sites that are no longer used for anything military, things like that. We've even used we use a number of sort of big areas of farmland as well. So you really just want a large area of fields that you can sort of bring stuff back on a parachute without a risk of it landing on towns, villages, people's houses, etc., etc. So yeah, so the very high altitude stuff, we've unfortunately been forced to go out and fly either in Australia or in the US, because we unfortunately don't have any deserts in the UK, which is a small geographical failing, at least from a Rocketeer's point of view.
So coming back to the STEM aspects and the looking for the next generations and so on, because as you hinted at, that we're running short on the skill sets that are required to keep us moving forward with all this. How much engagement and enthusiasm are you seeing from young people now? I mean, is it a struggle to get people engaged, or is it just the case that they're unaware, but once you make them aware, then they're enthusiastic? I mean, what's the feedback you're getting from the youth?
Yeah, so I think, well, the area that I sort of am trying to sort of focus my time on is younger students, and as you say, most of the problem is making them aware that the UK's got a space sector, and it's something that you don't have to be a scientist in a white coat with a big forehead to be able to sort of go and work in the space sector. Everyone thinks of the space sector and you think, oh, you've got to be either a rocket scientist or an astronaut, and that's it. Those are the only jobs. And I did a project a few years ago where we were looking at sort of jobs in the space sector, and we came up with over 500 different jobs, ranging from there are people who are literally artists who are engaged to go and paint space related paintings. That's a job in the space sector that people are paid to do. There's everything from marketing people, designers, graphic designers, web designers, people in every aspect of science, engineering. There's even people who have to be managers and HR people, and there's a whole field of space law. So the range of jobs in the space sector is absolutely enormous, and people just don't realize sort of how much the space sector actually impacts their everyday lives. If you ask the average sort of 10-12-year-old, how many interactions do you have with space technology every day, they're going to say zero, until you point out, well, how does your mum and dad use their sat nav? How does a sat nav work? Well, it uses satellites. There you go. There's an interaction with with space technology. The loaf of bread you went and bought from your local supermarket this morning, all of the logistics for supermarkets is all organized via satellite communications. So space technology actually impacts just about everything, from agriculture, fishing, climate. Absolutely everything has an element of space involved in it these days. So yeah, the first hurdle is really just explaining to people, space is a thing that's much bigger than you think it is. Not space itself, but the industry. People tend to be aware of how big space is, but no, the industry is a much bigger thing than you think it is. And there's all these incredible opportunities. It's not just open to rocket scientists and astronauts. There's hundreds and hundreds of things you can do in the space sector. And as I said, I often use myself as an example. I didn't go and do a degree. I was rubbish at maths. Didn't go and do a degree in anything in aerospace engineering. Not that I want to discourage people from doing that, because it's a great way to get started in it. But you don't have to. I often feel that I'm sort of one of those people who's very, very much putting the A in STEAM, because I come from a sort of design background rather than a sort of strictly engineering background.
I'm
So
glad you
yeah.
said that. I'm glad you said that because I've had a few discussions with people about STEM slash STEAM, and less so now, but initially going back just a couple of years, there was a distinct pushback. What's STEAM? That's a load of nonsense. What have the arts got to do with anything with engineering or aviation? And as you pointed out just now, that one of the first things you mentioned was artists having to being paid to do work for the space sector. I think that we're in danger of having quite closed minds about all of this, and just your enthusiasm and the explanation that you've just given gives me an awful lot of hope. And what we need to do is need to get that message out there and share it around, and just to make young people aware that hey, there's potentially a job or a career or a lifestyle that you could get involved with whatever your skill set is. So I'm glad we managed to have this conversation because I've been trying to get hold of you for a while, and I know you've been extremely busy, so it is appreciated. The clock is telling me that we're heading towards the end, so I'm not going to go to the last question just yet. It's just so what's coming up immediately? What's next for you? What's exciting you? What's got your focus right now?
So as I said, well, personally speaking, yeah, we've just managed to get some extra funding in order to be able to sort of expand what we're doing to try and hopefully cover other people. So I mean, at the moment, a lot of these competitions, inevitably you end up with the best funded private schools, and the students that are already motivated and already believe that they have a place in the space sector are the ones that tend to sort of enter these competitions and do well. And one of the things that we've just won funding for is to try and offer opportunities to try and expand beyond the sort of students who would normally consider space as being their thing. Yeah, so there's a whole load of areas. I mean, the whole going back to the whole sort of STEAM versus STEM thing. I mean, I speaking personally, I found that coming from an artistic background, I'm more used to being a little bit creative with how you solve problems than I think people who come from a strictly academic slash engineering background would do so, and I think that sort of seems to come across as something that applies across the whole space sector, possibly across the whole of aerospace. So and being I guess falling into the neurodivergent category myself as well, I've come across a lot of people who are the most innovative and the most likely to do something new and really, really world changing in the space sector tend to be the people who, yeah, fall into that sort of not purely academic, possibly neurodivergent category that wouldn't probably think themselves the right sort of people to go into the space sector. So that's what I'm really trying to do at the moment is try and find ways to get through to exactly those people and say, here's some opportunities for you to try this, and effectively let them prove to themselves that they can be part of the space sector. So as I said, there's no point going around telling people they can. As I said, but if you give them a whole bunch of parts and they show them how to build a rocket and they build it and it works, then they can prove to themselves that they can be part of the space sector.
Excellent. I'm really, really glad you said that because it's a subject that's sometimes tricky to pick up on as people shy away from it. But we all do think differently, and we all have a place on this in this world to do our things. And by combining our efforts and looking at things in different ways, then we actually make some progress. So I'm really glad you brought that up. So thank you for that. That's good. Right. We're getting towards the end now, so I don't want to miss the opportunity. So I'm going to ask you the big question of the day, and that is, what's your favorite aircraft? Or in your case, what's your favorite flying device and why?
Oh, okay. Oh well, you've thrown a spanner in the works. I had an answer for favorite aircraft. Favorite flying device. I would have to probably go back to it being a rocket. But all right, I'll answer both. Okay, favorite aircraft. And this is probably a fairly common one, and I'm going to be boring by saying it, but SR-71 Blackbird. um,
Oh,
just because it was when I was a kid. I actually tried to go and see it flying when we were on holiday up, actually, ironically, up here in Norfolk, and missed it. We missed it 3 times because we didn't get up early enough to see it leaving Mildenhall or Lakenheath, wherever they used to be based. Yeah, it was just one of those things that it was always the sort of the closest thing you could get to a real life spaceship.
mhm.
It just looked incredibly cool. And I suppose as I got older and sort of learned a bit more about it, realizing the incredible engineering that went into making it work, which, the more you understand about the engineering of these things, the less it seems possible that it could possibly have been made to work. It's so many innovations had to take place in order for it to be even possible that it
especially
just
especially at that time as well. I mean,
exactly, yeah, and we're
it's
talking like 40 years ago. So it's absolutely amazing that it was able to work. So that would be aircraft. Favorite sort of, yeah. If we include rockets, then I would actually say, good question. I'm going to say actually one of the early British sounding rockets. So it was a rocket called the Bristol Aerojet Skua, which was a British developed small sounding rocket, which is probably one of my favorites simply because it's so damn tiny. So it was only about 7 or 8 feet tall, and about 5 or 6 inches diameter. It's not very big at all, but it was at the time, I believe, the smallest vehicle capable of reaching space.
okay.
So yeah, until I read about it, I always, like I guess most people, thought, in order to reach space, you needed something the size of an office block. But yeah, when I found out that something that one person could pick up and put over their shoulder was capable of reaching space, it sort of gave me a little bit of inspiration that maybe the rockets that I was building might be a little bit more useful than I thought they were originally.
Wow. Well, that's some. I wasn't aware of the skewer, so I need to go and do some homework on that. So I'm going to press you though. Choose one: skewer or SR-71. What's going on the board?
All right, it's going to have to be the skewer, I guess, simply because, as I said, if it wasn't a rocket, I wouldn't be doing my job. So,
Right. Okay. Skewer's going up. Ben, it's been absolutely wonderful talking to you. Thank you very much for your time. I know you're a very busy man. Um, we are out of time, unfortunately, but I will be in touch the next time I'm down at Swift Aircraft headquarters down at Coltishall. So if we get a chance to catch up and have a cup of coffee, that'd be great. So
absolutely.
I'm going to say thanks for your time, and I'll speak to you sometime soon. Fly safe and stay well.
Thanks, Mike. Take care.
Okay. So that was Ben Jarvis. It's hard not to get excited by such a focused and dynamic personality. Rocketry is probably even less in the public mind than conventional aviation, but as Ben explained, it's everywhere and it's embedded in our daily lives. Ben covered so many areas, including STEM/STEAM, technical aspects, and stuff about himself, including being neurodivergent, that I've had to listen to his interview several times just to digest everything. He's a fascinating man working in a fascinating field. So, till touchdown brings me round again, we say thanks to Ben for his hashtag inspiring aviation, here on the Short Circuit. Fly safe. You have been listening to The Short Circuit, presented by Mike McLean and sponsored by Swift Aircraft with the hashtag Inspiring Aviation. This has been a Zoom Spike production.